friends, I am Rob, the Dungeon Tutor, and today I'm going to be tackling a question that was given to me by one of my friends in the GUI community. From the GUI Game Masters Den of Enlightenment Facebook group, which is the social outreach for GUI Cube. I asked for some questions and somebody gave me a great topic. They want to know more information about monsters, but not necessarily how to fight them, how a person might go about taming monsters, gathering them, and perhaps dealing with some sort of monster pet shop or something of the like. Now, this isn't unusual. This is something that has happened before. I remember any number of games where the purpose was to capture a creature, usually for something like inclusion into some sort of a zoo, or for translocating some monster from some place where it's not desirable to have a monster to some place that's safer, in the case of particular monsters that you don't want to just kill out of hand. So that's certainly something that's come up before, but rarely has there been a really good solid way of including that with game mechanics and explaining how to do that. And I know that there is a subsection of the gaming community that enjoys games like Pokemon, where you have the idea of finding creatures and befriending them, capturing them, taming them, training them, and that's fine, absolutely. I have had adventuring parties that had a small zoo or menagerie following them around, so this is not unknown to me. But for this, the purpose of this adventure, we're going to talk about, and I'm calling this an adventure because it's going to get a little interesting. We're going to talk mostly about 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons and how to do this. If you're interested in approaching this from another game's perspective, leave me a note, and I have absolutely no problem making a video for other game systems. But 5th edition does give us some resources that we can use to kind of get an idea on how we can do this. So, first of all, the very first thing most people will instinctively think about in how to handle monsters might be the animal handling skill. It's right there. And certainly most monsters a lot of them are animals of some sort. So it would seem to make sense that you would use that skill when doing all of that. The thing is, animal handling is primarily used for dealing with domesticated creatures. So, things like dogs, game animals, or riding steeds. That's another useful thing for it. But rarely does it have a great deal to do with actual monsters. It's primarily for creatures that are used to humanoid sentient races dealing with them. By its own description, and I will read from the Player's Handbook on this. Of course, Player's Handbook, trademark, Wizards of the Coast. For use wisdom checks animal handling. When there's a question whether you can calm down a domesticated animal, keep a mount from getting spooked, or intuit an animal's intentions, the DM might call for a wisdom animal handling check. You might also make a wisdom animal handling check to control your mount when attempting a risky maneuver. That's not very helpful for what we're doing here, is it? I don't really think so. For one thing, you're interested in monsters, right? So, horses and dogs, even war dogs, it seems kind of tame when you consider you've got a world of displacer beasts and blink dogs and beholders and whatever else, and you have a thirst to tame them. So the old animal handling check doesn't give you a lot to draw from. Obviously, you can extrapolate from that, and a game master is within their rights to say that animal handling can cover a great deal of ground. However, the assumption for this is that the behavior possibilities for a given creature are understandable within the context that the creature has been domesticated. This doesn't involve taking any kind of knowledge from other sources on what a creature is like, its temperaments, its abilities, especially abilities if they have special or supernatural powers. So therefore, it's kind of not really up to the task. Also, This is another reason why I personally don't like bottling up and labeling the skills and applying them to only one attribute. Because if that's the case and you're looking for knowledge about a creature, maybe it's more of an intelligence-based thing. What do you know factually about the creature that might prove handy? And when applying your skill, maybe it's your force of will that enables you to get through to that creature so that your charisma might be useful. Now, I'm no veterinarian, but rarely do I ever get bitten by animals. I have a great deal of respect for animals, and I think I have something of a natural animal charisma. And that's about a cue for my cat to start attacking me and trying to interrupt this video, but we'll see what we can do. So I think that using the different attributes as the base for skill checks is perfectly fine and should be encouraged rather than just lumping it under one particular skill. But if you're dealing with other creatures than the most common of domesticated animals, I think the other skills become more useful for at least informational purposes. So, looking at the other skills that are available, also under Wisdom, you have Insight. For creatures that are more intelligent, Insight might be more useful than Animal Handling, especially when Animal Handling clearly doesn't apply to a given monster. As far as Wisdom, though, that's largely it. Wisdom relies more on what you feel and what you can intuit as a common sense answer for something. And when you're dealing with monsters, a lot of it is more what you know as far as learning. What have you learned about the creature that enables you to associate with a particular monster? So, in that case, there's a bevy of skills that are awfully useful. Arcana, for instance. Purely magical creatures, like, say, elementals, something like Arcana might be far more useful for that than trying to get along with an animal handling check. Again, that doesn't really seem to fit very well. I, though, would definitely put nature as being far more useful for the vast majority of monsters. Anything that has a niche in nature itself certainly would give you a lot to go by for knowing what they eat, knowing their behavioral patterns, knowing if they can even be tamed or not. Religion might help with because religion in my games often has to deal with the undead or things that have been tainted with undeath. So that might give you an avenue. Plus, for creatures from other realms, your religion might actually teach you how to deal with creatures from other realms of existence. So that's something you might be able to draw on in some obscure circumstances. Your charisma does give mostly social skills a little bit of a help. But if you think of creatures that are, have to use negative consequences to try to train them, intimidation might be really useful if you don't want to actually bash a creature. The threat of it might give you a bit of an advantage in modifying behaviors if you're interested in training. Otherwise, by default, maybe even persuasion some game masters might step to and say, I believe that persuasion is mostly used for linguistic skills and persuading somebody. But what if you're a druid or ranger and you use a speak with animals spell? Now you can actually open up some of these other skills, and that would be why my obvious choice for somebody who is going to, monger animals and beasts and creatures would be that being able to talk to them would give you a huge advantage. At the very least, to give you advantage when you're trying to do things to get them to do what you want to do. So that could be something that you could translate into your search for becoming a prime monster hunter or so on and so forth. So that's really the extent of usefulness of the player's handbook. It doesn't give us a lot of details for this particular mission, but there's a few things that we can infer. And speaking of beasts, right on cue, right? She was about to maul the camera. And this is another example of the advisability of having monsters. The more self-willed a monster is, the harder it's going to be to train it, to tame it, to get it to do what you need to do or want to do. So in this case, trying to tame her and train her not to maul my camera It's a worthless cause. She just will not do it. She does what she wants, and that is something that I have to accept as my cat trainer skills. I can try to deter her. I could, say, keep a bottle of water handy to spritz her if she does try mauling my camera, but I don't really enjoy negative reinforcement all that much. I don't like to see an animal flinch when they see something that could be related to the thing that you use to dissuade them. And, you know, even though cats don't like getting sprayed with water, it doesn't hurt them, it's still not something I prefer to do. Right? Yeah, she doesn't worry about me much at all. As a matter of fact, situations like this, she can be pretty spotty as to who's the master and who's the pet. Right? Okay, you're going to be my lap kitty. So, that's about as much as the player's handbook gives to us. But I would take it a little bit further than that. Because the way that Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is, it's really loath to slap labels and say that anything is really all that mandatory these days. But I think that there are some tendencies and inclinations that do bear talking about. For instance, your average intelligence for a beast is going to be something pretty subterranean. Something like a 3 or a 4, maybe a 5 for a particularly bright beast. And that's not a bad window to use when applying the possibility of taming and training to a creature. In my mind, there's 4 different layers of reactions a monster hunter might end up having to go with. The default is wild. They have no contact with humanity. They may see you as a prey species. They do not necessarily respect you unless, as a race, they've had, as a breed, they've had a reason to suspect you. For instance, wolves that are hunted are generally going to be awfully cautious around the species that can hunt them. So, if humans are known as hunters of wolves, wolves will instinctively avoid them, which is why most animals don't really coincide with us all that well in nature. We've got a pretty bad reputation. But if I was going to, for instance, come across a monster in the wild, its association with any previous reactions that it might have had with sentient humanoid races, and most creatures aren't that discerning. An elf, a dwarf, a human, they're sentient humanoid races. They're to be reacted as such. Now, if, say, a creature has been predating upon humanoids, as is the fear in, say, a more wild area, like if, for instance, you have lions in your geographical location, and a lion kills a human. That lion is usually hunted down and killed themselves, because you don't want a creature that has learned that we're prey, because it's likely it will go on and try to do that again. If food is scarce, we, being made of meat, are certainly something that it could see. And that is a wild tendency that it makes it awfully hard to live side by side with most monsters or creatures. The second step would be tamed. The second step would be trained. It's a creature that can still have a lot of its wild instinct. Its behaviors haven't been modified at all, but instead they've been subverted to use those at the request of a partner, what it sees as somebody belonging to its pack. This is usually the response that an animal companion might have. Not tame, but trained in being able to do certain things upon command. And if you're going to use a creature in combat, you probably don't want them to be tame. You want them to have some of those instincts to fight as needed. Being able to do it on command can be tricky, but can be fairly useful, especially for creatures that have good abilities that would help them in a fight. The next one would be tamed, which means that that creature has had its violent instincts suppressed as much as possible. Now, there are some creatures that we just don't really feel can be tamed entirely. For instance, something like a grizzly bear, a creature that can get absolutely enormous. Few people would believe that such a creature could get tamed, although they're capable of showing great affection, especially if raised as a baby and eventually brought up to adult size. They can still crave affection, especially if they're fed regularly and they maintain contact with humanity. They may stop seeing us as food or a nuisance or a threat, and perhaps they can be pets is a little strong, but the problem is they're so large and they have natural weaponry that would be almost impossible to get rid of, really. I mean, would you like to remove a bear's claws and teeth? I don't know anybody who would do that. And while they have those, even in the course of play, it's quite possible for one to injure or kill a person. So calling them tamed would be very, very, very difficult to do. And as anybody who knows anything about even domesticated animals, if a creature is hurt or startled, its natural instincts can come to the fore, even overriding years and years of reinforcement to try to tame them. If you startle a dog, even the kindest and sweetest of dogs, it might bite. That's an inherent part of their nature that you can't completely repress. Some dogs you can go a long ways with, but ultimately if you hurt a dog or you startle them badly enough, they're going to react in the way that their natures command them to. So, tame is the ultimate level. And if you can tame enough creatures, you may be able to domesticate them. Now, domestication means that they are comfortable around the society of humans in general. For instance, a tamed bear is not one that, unless it's starving, is actually going to see people as food. That's been behavior that's been taken out of them. They will look for other options as they are used to. If bears become domesticated, that means that they actually have a functional role in a society. Whether that be as steeds. Can you imagine, grizzly bear cavalry? Sure, that'd be amazing. Kind of scary, and it would be difficult to have because grizzly bears eat a lot. So it would be a very expensive cavalry to have, but say for a group of halflings, having grizzly bear cavalry would be absolutely enormously frightening and could be very, very effective, as to be the reason you would want that. The more difficult it is to domesticate a creature, though, largely depends on how strong their nature is and how much the effort to try to domesticate them goes along. Sometimes in our fantasy, we have races that are already considered to be domesticated. I've seen campaigns, for instance, where dwarves ride giant lizards underground because they took in the time to domesticate these giant lizards. Kind of look a little bit like dewbacks from Star Wars. And you can go on and on and on with this. Aurochs, for instance, are often seen as proto-cattle and huge creatures with edible meat and skin and bone that can be used for building supplies and material. Domesticated, oftentimes. But if you found them in the wild, they might be quite a handful. The last level, it's not one of the four, and that's because it really doesn't apply to many monsters, is befriended. Because creatures that are sentient can't be tamed, can't be trained. They can be taught, which is different from training. Training is something you can compel on command. Teaching is something that gives a set of skills that the creature can use, and you can ask them to use that ability. But creatures that are sentient really have their own choices and may be capricious about who they choose to befriend. Most creatures will not sacrifice their own lives for another. Their instinct to live, to continue on, to eat and reproduce is stronger than their urge to serve in many cases. Now, Some that are really, really well domesticated, like dogs. There's a number of stories about dogs that are killed in the line of serving their masters, certainly. There are stories of horses that do the same. But most creatures aren't going to do that. My cat would not take a bullet for me, that's for sure, right? She just says, keep petting. But that is something that you kind of need to understand. Sentient creatures have to be handled a bit differently. You have to take the effort to befriend them, which is going to eliminate a lot of monsters from the list, quite honestly. You would have to treat them as somebody that you would want to influence, but it's not going to be in a master-slave situation master-servant situation, unless you're actually going to hire them or enslave them. The best option is generally to befriend them, because then they'll be willing companions to you. That's also why there are some real gray areas in terms of capturing some of the monster races and using them as pets or as something that you would take and sell to a monster shop. For instance, if you did that with pixies, certainly pixies can be used for spell components. Certainly pixies can be a nuisance or a threat. But most people would agree that capturing pixies and selling them to shops, at least in Dungeons and Dragons understands pixies, they are a sentient creature. Therefore, that's seen as kind of dark in most places. Now, of course, I'm not going to tell you how to run your game, and it may not be the case in your game. But pixies are more than intelligent enough typically to be considered sentient, and therefore the idea of capturing them to use them just as pets, well, that's seen by many as being, pretty dark stuff. Now, I'm going to go through a couple of creatures and explain one thing or another about, what to look for. Can this be made into a pet? Can this be captured? Can this be trained? But first thing I want to do is I want to go down the line of the types of creatures as can be found in the monster manual. This will also give us an additional guideline on what creatures can be potentially captured, trained, tamed, or if it would take a heroic and epic undertaking to do. So, the first one is an aberration. Now, aberrations are, well, as they say, aberrations are utterly alien beings, which means they don't work the same way as most other creatures do. The entire idea of cause and effect that can be used to train and tame other creatures doesn't necessarily work with aberrations. Take a beholder, for instance. Should you manage to capture a beholder, first of all, they're intelligent usually, so that kind of gets rid of that. If you take a baby beholder, before it's gotten its incalculable intelligence, and say for whatever reason it's very undereducated, you wanted to try to tame it to be your friend, eventually it's going to have its intellect develop to the point where it can choose utterly to throw off any kind of bonds that you want to try to put on it. And it's going to be even harder because its mind works in ways that we don't necessarily understand. It's kind of the thing that makes beholders' behavior sometimes utterly incomprehensible and seem to kind of fit closer to madness when we can understand it, or at the very least an urge towards tyranny and dominating everyone around them, which seems to be kind of a common trend from creatures from the far planes of existence where sleeping gods dream of dark fates. So aberrations by default are going to be much harder generally to try to train, capture, etc. To the point where I think a lot of veteran monster hunters would not even really try with most of them because of their unpredictability and the fact that many of them are fairly intelligent. Beasts are going to be the default monsters that you would want to try to capture, train, sell, and profit by. Many of them are not very intelligent, and that is good when it comes to asserting your role as their alpha or their protector or what have you, to try to build those kind of bonds. You are smarter than them, and therefore you can do the thinking for them and start trying to shape their behavior, if you understand how beasts work, you have a shot at it. Not saying it's always going to be successful, but at the very least, for instance, if you know what a particular beast likes to eat, by offering it food, realistically, you should be giving yourself advantage and test to try to tame a creature or to try to train it by offering food as a positive reward. On the other hand, a creature that is ill-fed and ill-taken care of, well, that's going to give you a disadvantage on anything you try. If you aren't taking care of the creature's needs, why should it listen to you? And in some cases, why shouldn't it look at you as potential food if you keep associating yourself with it? So that is a cat hair. That's another thing about handling animals. You gotta get used to hair and fur and stuff. So beasts are kind of the ideal for this, but not the only things that you might consider. The next one would then be celestials. Now, when you're starting to deal with outsiders, creatures from other dimensions, other planes of existence, one of the things with celestials and fiends is that they come from a place that is entirely bathed in the entire concept of some core abstract belief. Most celestials come from some place that strongly is tied to the forces of good. And therefore, to serve the good, almost all celestials are intelligent. It's kind of one of those things, the goodness itself is kind of an abstract that hinges on the welfare of all. And while there are some beasts that believe in the welfare of their pack, goodness generally tends to go a bit farther than that. So as a default, most things that are good generally tend towards intelligence. So again, not going to be something that you would generally tend to train or... But there are things that are celestially aligned. In that case, for instance, if you find a celestial lion, you could presumably reach out to it and attempt to train it, and maybe you might even have a better chance of training it if you somehow can demonstrate to it that you are a moral person, a good person. That does still mean, though, if it is still a beast, although it's celestial, that means that you're still going to have to take care of its needs. You're going to have to feed it so it's not hungry. Otherwise, it's still a lion, and if you are made of meat, it might still eat you. So, celestials might give you a leg up if you demonstrate that you are also interested in the things that they are interested in themselves. But again, the intelligent ones, you're probably going to have to try to befriend rather than try to train, just as an example. The same thing will apply to fiends, although the being tinged towards destruction, selfishness, and evil, many fiends are not as intelligent, and therefore you might be able to apply some of these elements. But because of their nature, they're often going to be tinged towards the side of wanton destruction, which is going to make this a lot harder. So if you want to try to tame a dretch, for instance, which is barely an intelligent fiend at all, you got your work cut out for you unless you indulge its destructive sides all the time. And part of why it follows you is because you lead it towards things that it can vent its fiendish nature on. So, something to think of. Dragons. Dragons are rough. Dragons are true dragons are largely intelligent. But on the other side, it's always been one of the dreams of the great heroes of role-playing games to ride on dragons. To the point where the original versions of Dungeons & Dragons had a provision that if you beat the sauce out of a dragon, you could compel it to surrender. And then you could try to claim it as a steed. There's some negotiation that would still have to go on, but yeah, the provision was there for any creature, any of the dragons. If you beat it using subdual, you could eventually get it to the point where it would have to surrender to you, and then possibly to serve you. And that provision stood for all of the dragons. Beat up a gold dragon, beat up a red dragon, same provision. You could, as a matter of course, get it to serve you. Now, the idea of beating up creatures to subdue them, well, that's just another form of combat, really. And A good DM can allow a person to say that their attacks are being aimed to subdue rather than to kill, and allow creatures to be taken captive. In which case, then, the monster might be fit if you can transport it to deliver to a zoo or something. But ultimately, I don't think that's really in the nature of what was asked here. The idea was to tame it, to train it. And again, the true dragons you're almost going to have to form a relationship with. Now, maybe dragons in your world have a kind of a bond, like Anne McCaffrey's Dragon series, Dragon Riders of Pern, etc. And that becomes a game master choice, largely. Perhaps you might encounter a dragon and befriend the dragon, to the point where the dragon respects you enough to fight by your side and maybe even let you ride it from time to time. Maybe the circumstances are such that it's just expedient to do that. It's a multiplier for the dragon's effectiveness because now it has a rider that can do things while the dragon is doing dragon things. The dragon will probably never think that that's necessary, but it might be optimal, in which case the dragon might do it. Even the most evil of dragons can see the point of having a rider on it that can, say, cast spells or keep things off of its back, something like that. But that doesn't become a taming type thing. On the other hand, there are drakes and other dragon-like creatures that very well might be candidates for becoming tamed, trained, possibly domesticated under some circumstances. You might have riding drakes. You might have guard drakes, certainly. And those could very well be effectively domesticated, earning a niche in your society where they serve a needed role. Absolutely. Again, this varies as much as any particular game master's world, so if any of this sounds attractive to you, go for it. But I would probably hesitate to say that a true dragon might ever really be tamed. You might be able to teach it something, like teaching a skill, and working to coordinate your abilities with the dragon certainly would probably take a little exposure to each other to do. But as far as employing, the skills used to tame that's probably not going to work so well with a true dragon. Constructs. Constructs are almost inherently non-intelligent, to the point where they are made, they are given some instructions, and that's it. They don't vary from those instructions. They do what they're told to do, and that's not really the same thing. That's basically the equivalent of trying to befriend or train your television. It does what it's told to do, and that's as far as it will ever go. A construct will not know friendship or loyalty, and few of them can really learn a great deal for initiative. But of course, this is Dungeons & Dragons, isn't it? There are the possibilities that you can have intelligent constructs. The Warforged are probably the classic examples of that. Sentient ones are going to follow all the rules for sentience, meaning that you pretty much have to befriend them, otherwise your options would be to put them into a caste system where they are merely servants, kind of like the Warforged were treated in Eberron before they won their freedom. You could have them as a slave race almost, as dominated by others, and maybe created for particular roles that they're forced to do. That could be something that you could explore in a game, certainly. But if they get to be intelligent, then again, taming and collecting them doesn't seem to make a great deal of sense. Elementals. Elementals vary widely. The more powerful ones are intelligent, so again, same argument. The lesser ones are not. And if you can overcome the need to, concentrate to summon them and keep them, if you can find a free-willed elemental that doesn't have to get yanked back to the elemental chaos, then, yeah, theoretically, it would be possible to train an elemental to, do more than just obey the summoning master's commands. Might even be really interesting if you can make an elemental hold a particular shape and serve a function for you. For instance, if you had an earth elemental that was, say, medium to large, and you had it stay in the guise of a warhound, big steed. With their strength, a person could ride on that, the elemental is pretty much doesn't get tired at all, and you'd be, you could have a very loyal servant as long as you did the kind of things that needed to be done to sustain the creature. Summoners, gimmick it with a spell, but if you found a free-willed one that was, say, stuck on your world, and you kept infusing it with magic that softened its irritation at not being on its home plane, that made it possible for it to perhaps even enjoy being in the prime material plane or wherever you found one, yeah, it's not unreasonable that you could take an animalistic elemental, as long as you figured out what it needed and what it wanted, and maybe tame it. Could be very interesting. The Fae. Oh, the Fae. The Fae are largely intelligent, and again, that's not going to apply, but there are a lot of Fae beasts and Fae creatures, right? The problem with the Fae is that inherently there's a bit of chaos that are built into them that make them a little less than reliable under most circumstances. Be it a mischievous nature, be it the fact that they can be very mercurial and their interests can vary from one instance to the next. The fact that the Feywild is frequently in flux and the creatures have a bit of that inside of them makes them awfully hard to train, to tame, despite the fact that some of them are really cool. I seem to remember people who've had a fascination with the elven cats, the Kushi. Pretty cool. Definitely a cool companion. So the Fae can be a little tricky, certainly, but the less intelligent ones might be tameable, and if you can take one and tame one, perhaps you could indulge in, maybe not domesticating them would be a bit of a reach, but possible to trade and sell them in the trade of monster collecting, possibly. Fiends, I've already explained why fiends would be very difficult. Fiendishly oriented creatures, though, like, say, a fiendish dinosaur, would be tough. Again, predisposed towards destruction, but if you're going to treat it as a war beast, that actually might not be too difficult, as long as you realize it's going to be very hard to stop them from killing and attacking. So if you have a fiendish Tyrannosaurus Rex, for instance, it's going to be brilliant in combat. You're not going to need to incentivize it much to go ripping and mauling. Stopping it from ripping and mauling people you don't want it to rip and maul is going to be the hardest part of that. And again, going with a creature's instincts might give you advantage on tests to try to control their behavior. Having them go against their nurtured instincts, the part of them that is drawn towards it because of their bloodline and origin, that's almost certainly going to be at least a disadvantage, and possibly even have a difficult number to boot. Giants! Most giants are intelligent, and they're going to be very, very hard to train. Befriending giants, though, can be pretty cool, and having a giant pal would definitely be cool. Humanoids! Again, the advisability, because most humanoids have intelligence, probably not training, but you might be able to teach, you might be able to work towards influencing behavior. Bear in mind, 5th edition is a game that has opened up wide the idea of creatures that normally were just monsters being somebody that you can associate with on a fairly regular basis, and perhaps transcending the stereotypes of their particular people. So, for instance, we see goblin adventurers now running lockstep around with the other races, despite the fact that just a few editions ago, those races had a built-in bonus to kill their kind because of hereditary issues, and who would want to play a goblin anyhow? A lot of 5th edition players, that's who. So, a lot of humanoids can't ever really be tamed. Generally, most of them have at least a certain amount of cunning and intelligence that disqualifies them from the garnering of new pets and the like. Monstrosities, things that are not real. Let's see what they say. Monsters in the strictest sense, frightening creatures that are not ordinary, not truly natural, and almost never benign. As long as they have certain animalistic intelligence, it is possible that you can make them see that not attacking is in their best interests. if, say, you're willing to feed them to satiation, they may not have the incentive to go and maul you. They may not have that built-in instinct to destroy and to dominate. But if they do, it's going to take an awful lot to overcome that. That's going to be one of the types of monsters that's going to be largest in the Game Master's decision to allow it to be possible to try to train such a creature. That's going to be something that you have to adjudicate as you go. I can only offer a few guidelines there. Oozes are generally not intelligent at all, and therefore, if they have no intelligence, you really can't do anything with that. So taming and training are, gone. What you can do, though, is you can rely on their natural instincts to direct their activity. For instance, if you want to have a black pudding, okay, and you want it to be the waste receptacle for your village, it would serve admirably for that, because its instinct is to eat. And if it constantly is being fed by the village, giving all of their waste to the black pudding, it might be very happy to just stay in one place and just keep receiving and receiving and receiving. The only downside to that is, of course, that it will probably grow, and you may occasionally have to burn it down to a manageable size, and then keep feeding it some more. So that's one way that you can kind of domesticate such a creature. But, for instance, if a small child ever puts their hand down into the pit, the black pudding will see them as food and go, and try to nom them. It will never be truly tamed. The only thing you can do is try to drive its natural instincts. The idea of gelatinous cubes, for instance, being useful as a dungeon cleaning tool, yeah, very much a tool is what they are, more so than a benign creature by any stretch, because they'll eat anything that's moving as well as whatever is dead, not having any one great preference. You can manipulate their behavior. For example, leaving more food than you present could distract a gelatinous cube, certainly. And as a game master, who knows? Maybe you could have an intelligent gelatinous cube, something that has a bit of sentience to it, and can therefore make its own decisions, maybe come up with a self-concept and reach out to other creatures intelligently. Perhaps not with the greatest intelligence, unless you wish it so, but something that with age might come some experience and an ability to treat these creatures as something beyond just being another ooze that moves around eating things. That's up to you, but the default is not really tameable or trainable, only possibly exploitable. Plants, likewise, generally non-intelligent. Yes, they do have certain behaviors that you can manipulate and can even take advantage of. But of course, this is a fantasy world, and there are intelligent plants as well, or semi-intelligent plants. Generally, if they have the slightest bit of intelligence, you might be able to train them. Basically, again, by a series of rewarding certain behaviors and possibly negative reinforcement of bad behaviors, you might be able to confine them to take advantage of certain traits that they might have, certainly. As they get more and more intelligent, all the same rules apply. Once they get past, I would say, 6 points of intelligence or more, it almost becomes impossible to tame. It becomes much more likely that you can befriend them or form an alliance or a bond with them more so than trying to tame them. And then finally, the undead. Now, the undead are going to be tricky. Most of them are non-intelligent, and therefore their behaviors are usually dictated by whatever animates them. Things that are somewhat intelligent, like ghouls that are basically ruled by their hungers, or wights that are ruled by their hatred of the living, you can manipulate their behavior to some extent, but don't ever expect loyalty. That's just not in their nature, unless, of course, again, the Game Master makes an exceptional one of their species that transcends that. But if that's the case, it's almost always going to push them into sentience, which then makes them kind of out of bounds as far as controlling them or manipulating them. And truly intelligent undead, it's just out of the the bounds of believability. Training or taming a vampire, unless it's some offshoot vampire, not the D&D vampire, yeah, it just doesn't seem to work. They're too willful, and many of them, because of their reliance on blood, which generally tends to diminish their humanity, which in general is going to turn them into very, very much a monster, puts them outside of the bounds also of training them. Even if you gave them all the blood they'd ever need, you're still probably not going to get great loyalty out of them, because if they feel they're being exploited, they feel they're not in charge of a situation. Vampires generally have a tendency to want to dominate a situation and not be willing to follow what somebody else, even if they are their hookup for blood, is willing to let them have. So they're also very powerful and willful, so it's generally not something that's advisable. So that is the broad strokes by the creature types on the challenges and advisability of trying to train the various creatures. Now, one of the resources I have, I gave these to my wife, are these baby bestiaries. These came out from, they won a silver Ennies, which is cool. And this is from Metal Weave Games. And now, I was enchanted by the art when they were selling the art for calendars and everything, but the fact they made these game books is kind of cool. And also, kind of a useful little resource as far as, thinking about what kind of creatures might work for being pets or, being able to be trained at all. But they do give warnings that some of them are extraordinarily difficult. And they go by, again, difficulty and cuteness. So this does serve to highlight one important thing, too. If you have a creature from an infant, you raise it, it learns to rely upon you. You can start right away trying to correct behaviors you don't like and enforce behaviors you do. That makes it vastly easier to have a companion that will stick with you for the rest of your life and obey you. Even if you are trying to enforce some sort of tameness on a creature, going from their youth and over a long period of time reinforcing behaviors gives you as much of a chance as anything of actually working to train and tame a creature. The thing is, they're monsters, so generally the idea of domesticating them is still a little bit outside of the bounds of believability, unless your game master has that built into their world. So, just thumbing through here really quickly, we would have, let's say the first creature, we have a basilisk lizardling. Adorable, isn't it? It's cute. And, as they say, intelligence clever. They're not supremely intelligent, but they do have a cunning and a canniness to know their abilities and know how to exploit them. Which means they would favor places where they could ambush prey or threats so that they could catch them with their petrifying gaze. They would know not to, say, attack large, well-armed groups that are prepared for a basilisk, and would seek generally to avoid things that might pose them direct danger. And the difficulty that they rate a baby basilisk to be trained is extremely difficult, because you always have to worry that the little thing is going to catch you unawares and petrify you. So that is a problem. Even as a small creature, they are capable of dominating and using their magical abilities to be very dangerous. A blink puppy certainly would be an attractive one. Blink dogs are generally oriented towards lawful and good. They fight against things that they see as being evil, that entirely built around destruction. They will try to get help to face bigger threats. They will work together as a team. So when you put yourself at the top of the pack, a blink dog should be a pretty convenient pet ally. Intelligence. They are intelligent. Yeah, they are a bit more than just beasts. They're actually quite intelligent, to the point where they have their own language. which can be understood, it can be communicated with, and they, with their supernatural abilities, they can be really tricky. You don't want them to go someplace, you want to screen them off, good luck. They can blink out and blink where they want to be. It's definitely would be a challenge. But a blink dog raised from infancy, when it still isn't all that intelligent yet and underexposed, you can definitely start training them in things that could be handy, like to attack in tandem with you. And then as they mature, as they gain that intelligence, they can transfer it into not just loyalty, not just training, not just reliance, but actual honest-to-goodness friendship, which could be really rewarding from the perspective of a monster trainer. We'll just skip ahead to another one really quick. Let's go to a, well, okay. Yeah, they have dragon wormlings in here. And so many people have this idea that if I find an egg, there goes my battle cat. If I have an egg, could I hatch the egg and then have a new companion, eventually steed? And theoretically, especially if you have a long-lived race like an elf, that becomes a possibility. But remember, even a hatchling dragon is intelligent. And the dragon will have a lot of say over what it feels like its role is in a relationship. So could you befriend a dragon at a very young age, especially if you're taking care of all of its needs? Yes, and absolutely. To the point where you could even, for instance, if you, say, had a, let's say a dragon of good, say you have a silver dragon hatchling. You hatch it from an egg, but you want it as a war steed. You want it to fight. You want it to, you know, do the kind of things that, you know, you want a really totally awesome dragon that can, you know, terrorize your enemies. Well, you could start off, you know, teaching it to fight, teaching it, you know, to respect you. And, yeah, you could change its behavior. But after a while, the dragon might look, because that's more against its nature, typically, and it may look to get away from you. It may look to use its copious amounts of abilities to turn the tables. If it thinks that you're evil, it might attempt to destroy you, or it might attempt to escape and get help for someone who would dare to, or have the ambitions to, have a dragon steed to dominate others. So if you favor evil that goes against its nature, who knows? It would be a very, very challenging thing to get it to do that. They're too intelligent, too strong-willed, typically. It really would require a lot of work and effort. And, you know, baby elementals. All of these things are very cute, by the way. So if you have a chance to get this book and you want a lot of daw factor, I've got two, and they're both really good. Again, the idea of taking a small creature and, you know, raising it up and training it. Yeah, once you can deal with their special abilities, making that possibly more challenging, or the fact they may have an inherent nature, which may, again, you either structure your training around that or do your best to try to combat it. It's going to be an uphill battle, so